Hello and welcome to our Cathedral check-in. I am Ansley Tucker, the Dean, and I'm here with Ian Powell, who with me is one of the members of the Cathedral's Building for the Future Committee. We are the ones who have been looking at how we might make our precinct work better for us. And recently we had some consultations within the parish to get some input from people who actually use the space and have dreams for its use. And we wanted to tell you what happened in case you weren't able to be there. So Ian, I'm going to share my screen here and just give a little sense of history of how we got here.
All right.
So let's go here and see if that will work. How about that? So there's a picture of our space with a honking great pillar blocking the view, kind of emblematic of the problems we run into from time to time. This is not working, so let me try a different. Let's try this one. And now, how about that? There we go. So how did we get here? Most people, I hope, will remember that a couple of years ago, we began a widespread visioning process in the cathedral, specifically with an outward turn to ask ourselves, what can we do as a cathedral in order to make God's mark on our community around us and to serve the wider church as well? We recognized that we have lots of assets, lots of people assets, but one of our greatest assets, Ian, is certainly the space, wouldn't you say?
Oh, heavens above, yes. And it's not just our space. I mean, we're talking about a whole precinct here. And I think one of the things that we led into with all of this was recognizing that we can't really look at one without the other bits for the whole precinct.
Right. And in fact, sure enough, this kind of a serendipitous collision of conversations, because our school has also been working on a strategic plan and in 2020 adopted a new plan. And that plan includes a very intentional emphasis on STEAM, which is science, tech, engineering, arts, and math, with a specialization in music, of course, partly because of our chorister program, which requires a particular kind of space that is just not available in the Memorial Hall, and also a decision to grow the school by a double cohort with one extra class a year over the next 8 years. And then in this past year, we have learned that our wonderful Wolf organ needs what turns out to be, after 15 years of life, routine but necessary maintenance, particular cleaning. We have some pipes which are now failing to sound. That's going to cost about $100,000. And it would be, we are told, an act of madness to do that before we did any work that might raise up some dust in the place. We'd be throwing good money after that. So that adds, we wouldn't say a level of urgency, but at least a level of strategic thought that needs to go into any changes we might be making.
Well, it has concentrated our minds on the whole topic. But of course, as I said earlier, we can't just look at that and the inside without considering all the outside. After all, we were embarking on looking at the outside lawns at one point and then realized, oh, we can't. It's a bit of a jigsaw and one must do it all together.
In the right order.
Yep. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting money, time, and effort.
Well, let's have a look at the work that we did a couple of weeks ago on a Friday and a Saturday. Ian, how would you like to take us through this?
I think it's important for people to understand, those who weren't there, how, it's easy for a small group of us, people who think they perhaps know perhaps a little better sometimes. I've been done construction stuff all my life in the hotel world, but to get a bigger sense from the community of what it is that drives, what it is they see, to find out, one, are we on track or are we completely off base? So I think the purpose of having these 2 days was very good, because it allowed those who really are day to day using the space and living the space and worshiping the space to have to put their words forward. And so, what is it, 2 days, and you had 4 or 5 groups in each session. It was though it can't be everybody, it was still a good smattering of people that could not hear each other, so they could come up with their own groups of ideas. Funny thing was, those groups of ideas were remarkably consistent.
So we started with big open-ended questions, and then we drilled down on some questions that took us back to the work that we had done during Greater Works and These. You want to say something about the big questions?
Yes, there is always the concern, I think, with this is, you can start by saying what's wrong, and then you'll get people going, but not everything's wrong. We've got really things. So we needed to know, what is it that people value and they want to keep? That's an important undergirding, because there's no point in afterwards going, oops, we made a boo-boo there. But we recognize we have got challenges. There are limitations. We'd love to do more, but only if, and we could do that if we only had. But what are they? I have my views, but other people would have their views. And then from that, trying to be a bit blue sky and say, well, how would you fix it? What would you do? If you could just do it, go for it. Just what would be the thing? I mean, for example, skipping ahead a little bit here, I heard several times people saying, well, we'll get rid of the pillars. Lovely idea. Great. Yeah, not so good. Unless we want the roof on our head.
The roof is falling in. It would be like Chicken Little.
Yep.
We also gathered our thinking around specific issues which emerged from our Greater Works consultations. So people are very concerned about our life of worship and devotion, which of course is the heart of our identity as a cathedral. And so we asked people how our space could enhance that experience. We already have a strong reputation in providing a musical venue in the city. How could we arrange our space so that we were better fixed to do that? And in addition to perhaps house exhibits of the visual arts, or to increase our experience of drama, as some of you will remember the raising of Lazarus last fall or so. How could the space itself be more welcoming? We can be welcoming, but could the space be more welcoming? And then finally, how could the space support our engagement with our neighbors and our service to the wider community, to the diocesan church? And this takes us back to that outward turn that I mentioned earlier in Greater Works Than These. So we took copious notes. There was a recorder in every group, and these materials were passed on to our consultants and turned into something which is understandable, I hope, for us. And Ian, then you have done a bit more work on those documents, and you're going to help us understand what people said.
Yes, it was a strange thing that I have to play with things to be able to make myself understand before I'm in a position to help others, I hope, understand. And we got this huge list of, like, unadulterated from the consultants, and then from them again a distillation of all of those notes. But even that made it sort of hard for me to sort of grasp, to be able to get across. And when I looked at it, I recognized that basically it was falling into 3 things quite clearly. Each question naturally fell into 3 things: physical, spiritual, and community. and that people's comments seem to revolve around those elements. So in what we valued, there was that uniqueness of all three things on the campus together, or the precinct. So the cathedral itself, the school, and the diocese. And how much history there was in the whole physical nature of the place. And believe it or not, despite the fact that it's a little bit shabby these days, the lawn seemed to prominently have a position in people's minds about what they saw that as a valuable asset. There was a whole notion of trying to balance between what we had as our cherished history and that cherished building, but recognizing that we needed to innovate and to move on. And I thought it was so clear on that physical. That on the spiritual side, people really were concerned to make sure that we valued that notion of the spirituality of the place we already had, and that what we did was to enhance anything. And that, we are blessed and sometimes cursed with a building that gives that grandeur and that lifting of our worship to a different feel by the nature of what it is. So we don't want to destroy that.
I was going to say, I heard that in both of my groups too, a real concern that we remember that this is sacred space, and that we whatever we do is reverent and tells us something about the goodness, the mercy, the justice of God.
Yes, absolutely. And then with the community, there was people thought that the way that we do have the interplay with the school. So, people sometimes complain that there aren't enough children in church and whatever it is. But we have children in church. They're in a school 5 days a week, just around next door, as it were. And the ability that we have at the moment, limited, that we engage in God's world, but wouldn't it be lovely to do more? And also a lot of people do recognize that we have a relationship with the community that we live in, the city that we're in, and they value that. So there was a lot of things that were valued, but as you might imagine, there was a lot of things that found challenging. And this is where I found it strange, because my three little groupings of physical, spiritual, community, spiritual almost fell away from that grouping, just a couple of minor things, physical and the ability to deal with the community were the two things that really popped to the front. And the physical, if there was one overriding thing that seemed to be there for all of it, was get rid of the pews, which was like, whoa, that was a surprise to me. Not that I don't agree with it, but it was just, I know how we've been in the past. But people were going down to really the whole complete shape of the place and how we can best do it. And is that really right? And is the chancel, that's that part that's beyond the altar rail, going back, encompassing the altar, does it really have to be that big? Isn't that a lot of space? There was comments about that all the time. The acoustics, how in one way they are beautiful in that they sound can come back at you and all the rest of it, but in others it really does make it almost impossible to hear what's going on. Even outside of that building itself, the north side, dark, not really inviting, but there's a lot of people approach us from that way. What could be done? Really not our best face. And how can we make the deanery and the synod office and all of that work together? Because it seems a bit daft that we've got several things going on at the same time, which is quite true, especially in today's age. And the lack of multifunctional space, that we try to make it multifunctional, but we really are trying to shoehorn, that classic silk purse out of a sow's ear type stuff. And the exterior lighting and signage, people really seem to want to make it, they don't think we're visible to the world in that sort of side. And community, they really felt that whilst there was a lot of things we do, and we may want to do more, we have to remember the congregation that we have and that people are somewhat limited in their abilities, but of course that would be countered with, but we're not just it. How can we move out? And if there's something worthy going on, we've probably got people who really want to be involved. That there was a need for us to be able to serve the children and younger people from the wider community and not just the school. And how could we respond to the adequate needs of the neighbours that are starting to build up around us more and more over this period of time as we see development going on around us. So that was really, there was a lots of physical things, the building not working, and how could we make, oh, one thing I did forget in that one, kitchen. Oh, did that come out loud and clear? Oh my word.
In my group too, yeah.
Oh, I heard it, and it was repeated time and time again. And you know, especially a guy who's been a hotelier for a number of years, it makes sense. You know, we often say when you break bread and you sit down together, things happen. And therefore our ability to be hospitable, to host, to make happen often will occur around food. And it's much easier if you've got the right facilities to be able to do it. So what did people start to say they wanted when they blue skied a bit? Well, again, it was really the big things that they were going for were physical and community, the spiritual. The main thing on the spiritual, just to get that one out of the way, was the notion of the stained glass in the Jerusalem chapel being so beautiful and the rest of it, but the actual chapel itself being eh. So it was that combo between the two. Please don't get rid of the stained glass, but. So that was on that. What people really, really are talking about, and it was actually for me quite uplifting to hear, was the flexibility. They really want to see the place work. I've often said a very crass thing in some people's ears, that the old girl has to pay for herself. In this world that we live in, where things have to work and things aren't necessarily cheap, we have the ability to offer up the space that we have, but in a way that helps to keep the thing going so that future generations are able to enjoy it. And again, people were talking about reconfiguring the whole front, and could we put something else in there and make the altar in a different place, or make it smaller, or can we move it? So, and there were different ways, but again, much more imaginative than perhaps I would have thought going into it. Yeah, the get rid of the pews came up again. More integration people were wanting between the school and the cathedral. And there was a couple of comments that actually referred to the kitchen being a way that it would, in terms of if the kitchen can be used by them for feeding, as well as the community for feeding, for us for social stuff. It was, I thought, wow, this is getting quite expansive. This is good. There was a genuine need, and mentioned a few times, with regards to how can we help the community? So if we create flexible space, if we have meeting rooms, if we have the ability for things on the site, can we have clinics that help people to engage? Can we just have social space, whether that be a cafe or whatever, so that people feel, as the density around us increases, that we become a hub or an oasis that allows things to just be that break in all that hullabaloo that is going on around them. And they're only in a 900 square foot, if they're lucky, condo, maybe 500 square foot. So I think it was remarkable to see how people didn't want to keep this thing we have for ourselves. They really want to share.
That's great. So where we are now in this process is that we've got two things happening on parallel tracks. One is our consultants are doing what is called framing a master plan. So that does not mean they're coming back to us with drawings. It means they're coming back with us with clarity about all the kinds of things that we need to consider if we are to move forward with some kind of drawings or plan, whether it's multi-staged or truncated or whatever it is. So that's one piece. The other piece is that we recently received a grant from the City of Victoria, an intercultural arts grant, to allow us to do a feasibility study on what could be possible within the footprint of the cathedral itself, in order to support our work with the arts, and also, of course, to support the liturgy. And that has brought us in contact with an architect who will be taking the material that Ian has just been talking about and using that as a kind of creative brief for thinking about the things that need to happen in our space. So we're a long way off seeing anything on the ground, but we're moving carefully and trying to keep people in the loop and ears and eyes open. So you were going to say something.
Yes, I think we keep banding around the word consultants and stuff, and I can see some people rolling their eyes because you'll go, "Oh, consultants." Yeah. Actually, they're really great people. I'm always a bit skeptical with consultants because I've used them all my life, but sometimes you do hit on the right thing. But there's a reason why. I mean, I and a couple of us have a bit more experience with this stuff than the average person. And I sort of know my way around, but we don't know. We need experts. I know what I don't know. I'm sure the Dean knows what she doesn't know. And if we're going to make this a valuable thing for the future, we need people who can guide us correctly. We cannot go off of just simply what we think is appropriate. They've got to help maybe stretch us even more, or rein us in at times to say, physically me. But I just want people to recognize that the consultants we're doing, it's judicious use of consultants, but very valuable use, I think, in my part.
We are grateful to Christchurch Cathedral Buildings for having made the resources available to hire wiser projects to help us with this. So at the moment we're in exploratory phase. Ian, I want to thank you for your time this morning and for your participation in this ongoing work. And to everyone else, thanks for watching, and we hope that you'll check back in with us next time. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Ian.
Sure, bye.
Bye.